The Call of Stymphalis. A Cosmic Horror Story. Chapter 1: Awakening. Sarah drifted in the darkness between stars, her consciousness suspended in the liminal space that separated life from death. The biostasis capsule cradled her form in its protective embrace, preserving her body and mind for the long journey through the cosmic void. But something had gone wrong. The first sensation was pain, searing, all-encompassing pain that seemed to come from every cell in her body at once. Sarah's eyes snapped open to darkness, but this was not the gentle darkness of stasis. This was an active, malevolent void that pressed in on her from all sides, whispering secrets that human minds were never meant to know. Her scream was silent, swallowed by the hungry darkness that seemed to mock her suffering. Multi-voiced wails echoed through the abyss, each one a note in a symphony of cosmic horror that threatened to shatter her sanity. She couldn't see herself, couldn't feel her physical form, but every nerve ending burned with the agony of revelation. This was impossible. She was supposed to be asleep, temporarily dissolved in the preserving solution that blurred the line between life and death. But the darkness around her was alive, aware, and it was feeding on her terror. When the madness threatened to consume her completely, reality exploded. The sensation of falling, of tumbling through endless space, ended with a violent impact that sent sparks dancing across her vision. Real, physical pain lanced through her body, pain with the coppery taste of blood and the acrid smell of burnt electronics and preservative fluid. Her bare skin pressed against cold metal, and she could feel the texture of the deck plating beneath her. Sarah struggled to her feet, disoriented and naked, her mind reeling from the transition from cosmic horror to physical reality. The command bridge of the Stymphalis lay in semi-darkness around her, the emergency lighting casting long shadows that danced like living things. The air was cold and still, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the ozone scent of damaged electronics. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the tomb-like silence. "This can't be happening." The biostasis pods that lined the walls of the command module were in various states of damage. Some had shattered completely, their occupants. Sarah forced herself to look away, her stomach churning at the sight of what remained of her fellow crew members. First Officer Mitchell floated in his pod, the helmet of his stasis suit missing, his face frozen in a rictus of agony. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, the pupils dilated in terror. The pod's preservative fluid had turned a sickly pink, tinged with the blood that had poured from his ears and nose. Lieutenant Salomia Sabotage's pod had been crushed like a paper cup, the reinforced glass shattered inward. What remained of the young officer barely looked human anymore, and Sarah had to clamp a hand over her mouth to keep from vomiting. Chief Engineer Rowan's pod had malfunctioned catastrophically. The temperature regulation system had failed, cooking him alive in his sleep. The smell. Only second pilot Samuel Volkov showed signs of life, but Sarah wished he hadn't. The young man thrashed weakly in his restraints, his eyes rolling in their sockets like a terrified horse. Drool ran from the corner of his mouth, and he made small, whimpering sounds that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. "Samuel," she called out softly, but there was no recognition in his eyes. "Can you hear me?" The only response was a high-pitched keening that made Sarah's teeth ache. A voice from the shadows made her spin around, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The reason is more interesting than you might imagine." Captain Everett stepped into the dim light and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Like her, he was naked, but that was where the similarity ended. His skin. Dear God, his skin was gone, replaced by a raw, red surface that wept blood and other fluids. He looked like something that had been flayed alive, yet he moved with purpose and strength. "Captain," Sarah's voice came out as a squeak. What happened to you?" "What happened to all of us," Everett corrected, his voice a ruined thing that sounded like stones grinding together. "We woke up, Sarah. We woke up to the truth." She backed away, her bare feet slipping on the cold deck. This isn't right. We should be in stasis. The Stymphalis is supposed to be in hyperspace, if we're awake. If we're awake, then we've arrived, Everett finished. But not where we expected. He gestured toward the main view screen, which showed only static and strange, swirling patterns that hurt to look at. Tell me, Sarah, what do you see out there? Nothing, she said, then corrected herself. No, not nothing, something wrong. Exactly. Everett's ruined face split into what might have been a smile. We've traveled beyond the edge of human understanding, my dear. We've seen what lies between the stars, in the spaces where physics breaks down and reality becomes negotiable. Samuel Volkov suddenly screamed, a high, ululating sound that seemed to come from more than one throat. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, multiplying until it seemed like a chorus of the damned. He's learning, Everett said casually, as if discussing the weather. The knowledge is spreading, cell by cell, neuron by neuron. Soon he'll understand as we understand. Soon he'll see as we see. You're insane, Sarah whispered. Am I? Everett tilted his head, considering. Or am I the only one who's truly sane? Tell me, Sarah, what do you dream about in stasis? What whispers do you hear in the darkness between stars? She didn't want to answer, didn't want to give voice to the memories that were clawing at the edges of her consciousness. The darkness, the voices, the sensation of being watched by something vast and hungry. The Stymphalis wasn't just a colony ship, Everett continued, beginning to pace back and forth in front of the view screen. His movements were wrong, too fluid, as if his joints bent in directions they shouldn't. It was an experiment, a test to see how far human minds could be pushed before they broke. And we broke, Sarah. We broke beautifully. No, Sarah said firmly, trying to hold on to her sanity. No, that's not right. We're a colony mission. We're supposed to establish a new world, a new life for humanity. A pretty lie, Everett dismissed with a wave of his mangled hand. The truth is so much more interesting. We're not the first, Sarah. We're not even the 1000th. The Stymphalis is just one of countless ships that have been sent into the cosmic void, each one carrying its cargo of human souls to be tested, to be broken, to be remade. He turned back to the view screen and Sarah saw him input a series of commands. The static began to clear, revealing something that her mind couldn't quite process. It was space, but not as she knew it. The stars were wrong, twisted into impossible geometries that hurt to look at, and between them. Don't look, she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut. Don't look at it. Too late, Everett said softly. You've already seen it, you've always seen it. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? Sarah opened her eyes and saw that Samuel had stopped thrashing. He was staring at the view screen with an expression of terrible understanding, tears running down his cheeks. His mouth moved, forming words that had no sound. What is he saying? She asked. He's praying, Everett replied. Praying to gods that don't exist, praying for salvation that will never come. Because there is no salvation, Sarah, not from this. The ship's AI, Anansi, spoke with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Captain Everett, I must strongly advise against this course of action. The psychological stress on the crew is irrelevant, Everett interrupted. They need to know, they all need to know, wake the others. I cannot. You will, Everett commanded, and there was something in his voice that made Sarah's bones ache. Wake them all. Let them see what we've seen. Let them understand what we've understood. There was a long pause, and Sarah could feel the ship's systems shifting around them. The gentle hum of the stasis pods powering down, the hiss of the preservation fluid draining away. One by one, the other members of the crew were waking up to the same nightmare that she had experienced. Why, she asked, her voice small and broken, why are you doing this? Everett turned to look at her, and for a moment, something almost human flickered in his ruined eyes. Because knowledge wants to be shared, Sarah. Because the truth, no matter how terrible, is still the truth. And because we can't go back to what we were before, none of us can. He was right, she realized with growing horror. She could feel it inside her, the knowledge that she had gained in the darkness between stars. It was eating away at her sanity, replacing human thoughts with something else, something vast and cold and hungry. "Welcome to the real universe," Everett said, spreading his arms wide. "Welcome to the truth." The screaming started shortly after. Chapter 2: The Consortium. The boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic display. 3 figures sat around the polished table, their faces illuminated by the blue-white glow of the data streaming across the screen. The information was not good. 66 years, Director Malia said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much. "The Stymphalis has been missing for 66 years, and now it simply reappears in the Stymphalian system." "Dead system," Lamira corrected, her pale face even more drawn than usual. "Dead star, dead worlds, nothing but ash and silence for a dozen light-years in any direction." "Which begs the question," Victor interjected, his scarred fingers drumming on the tabletop. "What the hell was it doing there?" Director Malias leaned back in his chair, the expensive fabric creaking under his weight. He was a large man, both in stature and presence, with the kind of face that had seen too many betrayals and not enough victories. "That's what we're here to find out." The holographic display shifted, showing the Stymphalis as it appeared in the long-range sensor readings. The colony ship looked intact, which was impossible. No ship could survive for 66 years in deep space without showing signs of wear, of damage, of the passage of time. "It looks brand new," Lamira observed, her analytical mind already working through the possibilities. "No micrometeorite impacts, no radiation damage, no signs of decay. It's as if it just left the shipyard." "Or as if time didn't touch it," Victor suggested, his voice carrying an edge that made the others look at him sharply. "Explain," Director Malias commanded. Victor shrugged, but his eyes never left the image of the ship. "Time dilation effects, maybe. If the Stymphalis fell into a region of space with extreme gravitational fields, or if it encountered some kind of spatial anomaly." "The Einstein-Rosen bridge theory," Lamira nodded. "A wormhole could explain the time discrepancy, but it wouldn't explain why the ship appears undamaged." "Nothing explains this," Director Malia said flatly, "which is why we're going to investigate, quietly. The last thing we need is for the media to get wind of this before we know what we're dealing with." The other two nodded in agreement. The Stymphalis project had been one of the most expensive endeavors in human history, a massive colony ship designed to carry 10,000 souls to a new world. Its disappearance had been a public relations disaster, one that the consortium had spent decades trying to live down. "I want constant surveillance," Director Malias continued. "Every sensor, every scanner, every piece of equipment we have. I want to know everything about that ship before we make contact." "And if there's nothing to find?" Lamira asked. "Then we'll know that too." The director's voice was cold, "but something brought that ship back and I want to know what it was." As the meeting broke up, each of the 3 took their own fears with them. Lamira, the head of security, worried about what might be lurking on that ship. Victor, the intelligence chief, worried about who else might be interested in the Stymphalis' return. And Director Malias worried about the truth and what it might cost them all. The salvage ship Saiga dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that ran through the hull like a dying man's gasp. Luke gripped his restraints tighter as the old transport bucked and twisted, the ancient hyperdrive protesting the rough treatment. 3 minutes to real space," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "All hands prepare for turbulence." "Turbulence," Luke muttered, sharing a knowing look with his second-in-command, Orst. "That's one way to put it." The Saiga was old, even by the standards of the Dangel cartel's fleet. The Tambrium hyperdrive was a second-generation model, notorious for its rough transitions, and the strange side effects it sometimes produced in the crew. Luke had made dozens of jumps in ships like this, but he still remembered his first time, the disorientation and the dreams that had lasted for weeks afterward. The new recruit sitting next to him looked green around the edges, his fancy security training clearly not preparing him for the reality of cartel operations. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" the kid asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Like what?" Luke asked, though he already knew the answer. Like something's trying to crawl inside my head." Luke grinned, but there was no humor in it. "That's just the drive singing to you, boy. You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, you'll learn to function." The Saiga was part of the joint operation between the Danger Cartel and Astrogen, the independent shipbuilding conglomerate that had its fingers in every pie from here to the galactic rim. The alliance was one of convenience. Astrogen had the ships and the tech, while the cartel had the muscle and the experience in operations that skirted the edge of legality. Luke didn't trust the arrangement, but he trusted the money that came with it. And the Stymphalis represented the biggest payday in decades. A colony ship, lost for 66 years, suddenly reappearing in a dead system. That was the kind of mystery that could make a man rich or get him killed. The ship lurched again as it completed its transition to real space, and Luke felt the familiar sensation of his stomach trying to crawl up his throat. The new recruit wasn't so lucky, doubling over and retching into the bag provided for just such occasions. "Welcome to the big leagues, kid," Orst laughed, slapping the younger man on the back. "This is where the real money gets made." Luke tuned out the banter and focused on the mission ahead. The Stymphalis was out there, waiting for them, and whatever secrets it held, they were about to find out. The approach to the Stymphalis was unlike anything Luke had experienced in his years as a salvage operator. The ship hung in space like a monument to forgotten dreams, its hull pristine and untouched by the passage of decades. It was wrong, and every instinct Luke had screamed danger. "No response to hails," the communications officer reported. "No power signatures, no life signs, no nothing. It's as dead as the system around it." "Keep trying," Luke ordered, studying the sensor readings with growing unease. "And maintain distance until we know what we're dealing with." The Stymphalis was massive, a kilometer-long cylinder designed to carry thousands of colonists in suspended animation. According to the records, it had been equipped with the most advanced systems available at the time of its launch, including an experimental AI that was supposed to be capable of independent decision-making. "Anansi," Luke muttered, remembering the AI's designation. "Any chance it's still functional?" "Negative," the tech specialist replied. "No computer activity detected. The whole ship is dark." Which was impossible. Even with catastrophic system failure, there should have been some residual power, some emergency system still functioning. But the Stymphalis was completely, utterly dead. "Ready the boarding party," Luke decided. "Suits, weapons, full protocol. I want this done by the book." Orst nodded and began organizing the team. They had brought 12 people for the initial survey, all experienced operators who knew how to handle themselves in zero-G and potentially hostile environments. But as they approached the massive colony ship, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far beyond their experience. The docking procedure was textbook perfect, the Saiga's airlock connecting with the Stymphalis' emergency access port. The magnetic clamps engaged with a solid thunk that Luke felt through the hull, and the pressure equalization began. "Remember," he said to his team as they prepared to board, "we don't know what happened here. Keep your eyes open, your weapons ready, and your mouths shut. We document everything, touch nothing until we know it's safe." The airlock cycled open with a hiss, revealing the darkness beyond. Luke led the way, his tactical lights cutting through the blackness of the access corridor. The Stymphalis stretched out before them, a vast metal tomb filled with the silence of the dead. And somewhere in that darkness, the truth was waiting. Chapter 3: The Darkness Between. The interior of the Stymphalis was a study in controlled chaos. The main corridors were intact, the emergency lighting providing just enough illumination to navigate by, but there were signs of violence everywhere. Scorch marks on the walls, strange stains on the deck plating, and a smell that Luke couldn't quite identify but that made his skin crawl. "Team 1 to Saiga," he reported over his comm unit. "We've made entry, proceeding to Central Command. No contact with crew at this time." "Copy, Team 1," the Saiga's operations officer replied. "Maintain regular check-ins. We're reading some anomalous energy signatures from deeper in the ship. Could be malfunctioning equipment. Or could be something else entirely," Luke thought but didn't say. The energy readings had been fluctuating since they docked, spiking and dropping in patterns that didn't match any known system failures. It was as if the ship itself was alive, breathing in the darkness. They moved through the corridors in standard formation, 2 by 2, weapons at the ready. The Stymphalis had been designed to house thousands of people, and the scale of the ship was overwhelming. They passed residential sections, recreational facilities, and storage bays, all empty and silent. "Where is everyone?" Orst asked quietly. 10,000 people don't just disappear." Luke didn't have an answer. According to the ship's manifest, the Stymphalis had been carrying colonists from a dozen different worlds, all volunteers for the long journey to a new home. They should have been in stasis, their bodies preserved in the massive biostasis chambers that filled the ship's midsections. But the chambers they passed were empty, the pods open and abandoned. No signs of struggle, no evidence of what had happened to the occupants, just empty shells where people should have been. "Command center ahead," Luke announced as they approached the main lift shaft. The doors were open, revealing the cavernous space of the ship's control hub. This was where the Stymphalis had been piloted from, where the AI Anansi had overseen the journey. The command center was a scene of devastation. The main viewscreen was dark, the control stations smashed and burned, but it was the bodies that drew Luke's attention. They were arranged in a rough circle around the central command chair, as if they had been gathered for a meeting when death came for them. But these were not the peaceful expressions of people who had died in their sleep. These were faces twisted in terror, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with the horror of what they had seen. "Jesus Christ," one of the team members breathed. "What happened here?" Luke moved closer to examine the bodies, his training taking over despite the growing sense of dread in his chest. The victims, he couldn't think of them as crew members anymore, not with those expressions, showed no signs of physical trauma. No wounds, no burns, no evidence of what had killed them. But their faces told the story. Whatever they had seen, whatever they had experienced in their final moments, it had been beyond the capacity of the human mind to comprehend. "Team 1 to Saiga," Luke reported, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his gut. "We've reached the command center. Multiple casualties, cause of death unknown. No immediate threats detected." "Copy, Team 1. Recommend you begin evacuation procedures. We can send in a full medical team too." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of static that made Luke's teeth ache. He tried to re-establish contact, but the comm unit was dead, its display showing only gibberish. "Comms are down," he announced to the team. "We're on our own until we can get back to the ship." Which was when the screaming started. It came from deeper in the ship, a sound like nothing Luke had ever heard before. Not human, not animal, but something in between. Something that had once been human but had been changed by whatever it had experienced in the darkness. "Weapons ready," Luke ordered, though he didn't know what good weapons would do against whatever was making that sound. "Form up on me. We're heading back to the ship." But as they turned to leave, the lights went out. Complete darkness fell over the command center, the emergency lighting dying with a sound like a sigh. Luke's tactical lights cut through the blackness, but they seemed weaker than they should have been, as if the darkness itself was pressing in on them. "Stay calm," he ordered, though his own heart was hammering in his chest. "Stay together, we're getting out of here." The screaming was getting closer, echoing through the corridors of the ship, and beneath it, Luke could hear something else. A whispering, a muttering, as if the ship itself was speaking to them in a language that human ears were never meant to hear. "The darkness," Samuel Volkov's voice came from the shadows, but it was changed, multiplied, as if many voices spoke with one mouth. "The darkness between the stars. We saw it. We understood." Luke spun toward the sound, his weapon tracking across the empty space. "Show yourself." "We are shown," the voice replied. "We are all shown now. The truth, the real truth about what waits in the void. It's beautiful in its way, terrible and beautiful and hungry." The tactical lights began to flicker, and in the strobing illumination, Luke caught glimpses of movement. Shadows that moved wrong, shapes that didn't match the geometry of the room, things that flickered at the edge of vision. "We need to move," Ors said urgently. "Now." They ran through the corridors of the Stymphalis, the screaming and whispering following them like a storm. The ship had become a maze, the familiar corridors twisting into impossible configurations. Doorways led to rooms that shouldn't exist, stairs climbed into darkness that had no end. And everywhere the feeling of being watched, of being studied, of being weighed and measured by something vast and patient and utterly alien. The Saiga was gone when they reached the docking port, not damaged, not destroyed, but simply gone. The magnetic clamps were still engaged, the airlock still connected to nothing at all. "Where's the ship?" one of the team members asked, his voice cracking with panic. "Gone," Luke said simply. "They left us." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The Saiga hadn't left. It had been taken, consumed, absorbed into whatever reality the Stymphalis now occupied. "We are all gone," Samuel's voice came from behind them, but when they turned, there was no one there. "We are all part of the darkness now, part of the hungry void that waits between the stars." "What do you want?" Luke demanded, his weapon trained on empty air. "Want?" the voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Want is such a human concept. We don't want, we exist, we hunger, and you are so very, very delicious." The lights came back on suddenly, blindingly bright, but they revealed a command center that had changed. The bodies were gone, the control stations repaired and functional. The main view screen showed not the dead system they had entered, but something else entirely. A vista of cosmic horror that defied description. Stars that moved like living things, nebulae that breathed with purpose, and between them all, the darkness that was not empty but full. Full of eyes and mouths and reaching appendages that existed in dimensions that human minds couldn't process. "Welcome home," Everett's voice said from behind them. "Welcome to the real universe, the one that was always here, waiting for you to open your eyes and see." Luke turned to face the captain, but what stood before him was no longer human. It wore Everett's shape, but there was something else looking out through his eyes, something vast and ancient and utterly without mercy. "The Stymphalis didn't disappear," it said with Everett's mouth. "It was taken by the things that live in the spaces between spaces, the creatures that exist in the mathematical impossibilities of hyperspace, and now you're part of it, part of us, part of the great hunger that drives the universe forward." The team members were changing, Luke realized with growing horror. Their faces were taking on the same expression of terrible understanding that he had seen on the bodies in the command center. One by one, they were falling to their knees, their eyes fixed on the view screen, their mouths open in silent screams. "You can't fight it," the thing that had been Everett said gently. "No one can. The knowledge is too vast, the truth too terrible, but don't worry, you won't suffer long. None of us suffer long once we understand." Luke was the last one standing, the last one still clinging to his sanity. But he could feel it slipping away, feel the edges of his mind crumbling under the weight of what he was seeing. The universe was not empty. It was full. Full of things that had been waiting for humanity to reach out and touch the stars. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Why not?" the thing replied. "Existence is consumption. Life feeds on life, consciousness feeds on consciousness. And we are the ultimate consumers, the final hunger that waits at the end of all things." Luke's weapon fell from nerveless fingers. There was no point anymore. No escape, no rescue, no hope. The Stymphalis had carried them not to a new world but to a new understanding, an understanding that would destroy them all. "Don't be sad," the thing that had been Everett said, reaching out with hands that were no longer entirely solid. "You're becoming part of something greater, something eternal, the hunger that drives the universe, the darkness that waits between the stars." As the darkness closed in around him, Luke had one final thought. They had been wrong about space. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the hungry ghosts of civilizations that had reached too far, touched things they didn't understand, and been consumed. The Stymphalis had come home, but home was not what they had expected. Home was the darkness between the stars, the hungry void that waited for all living things. And now they were part of it. Epilogue: The Hunger. The Stymphalis drifted in the dead system, a monument to human ambition and cosmic horror. The salvage crews that approached it in the following months would find nothing but an empty ship, its crew vanished, its secrets locked away in the black box recorder that no one would ever be able to decode. But sometimes, on the edge of sleep, the survivors would dream of the darkness between the stars, of the hungry void that waited for them. And they would wake with the taste of cosmic dust in their mouths and the knowledge of their own insignificance burning in their minds. Because the universe was not empty, it was full. Full of the things that waited in the darkness, full of the hunger that drove all living things toward their inevitable end. And the Stymphalis was just the beginning. The call of the void had been answered. Now the void was calling back. The end.